Germany and the United States say they are now prepared to send armoured vehicles to Ukraine. After speaking by phone, the two countries' leaders announced that Ukraine would receive German-made Marder and US-built Bradley fighting vehicles. The decision follows a French move to equip Ukraine with similar hardware.
This is the AMX-10 RC. It's a French light battle tank that's highly mobile and fitted with a powerful gun. Now, to Ukraine's delight, France is donating some of these armoured combat vehicles to Kyiv.
France brings a new level of European defence support to Ukraine, and I thank President Macron for this leadership. We'll get more armoured vehicles, including French-made wheeled tanks, which sends a clear signal to all our other partners. There is no rational reason why Western-style tanks have not yet been supplied to Ukraine. It's important in order to restore security for all Ukrainians and peace for all Europeans.
Zelensky has clearly been frustrated by the West's reluctance to give his country the tanks he says it so desperately needs. Joe Biden has now said the US will send Bradley fighting vehicles to help Kyiv. They've been used by the US military to carry troops around the battlefields since the mid-1980s. Military experts say the Bradley would give Ukraine more firepower and strengthen its ability in trench warfare. But Biden's move falls short of sending in heavy tanks, like the Abram, which is what Kyiv really wants. Berlin was reluctant to agree to donate Marders, which are armoured personnel carriers. But the Scholz government gave way to increasing pressure to change its mind.
We have discussed supporting Ukraine in its right to self-defense, even with heavy weapons, because Putin believes that he can hold out longer, and that if at some point Ukraine ran out of weapons and international support, he would win this war.
And as the devastation in Ukraine mounts, the pressure on all Kyiv's allies will only increase.
Straight to Kyiv then, and we join our correspondent, Roman Goncharenko. Welcome, Roman. So when are these vehicles likely to arrive on the battlefield, and what sort of difference would they make?
Well, it looks like a major breakthrough because Ukraine has been asking for these vehicles and for these weapons for months, and now several countries said that they would deliver them. As to the terms, I would suggest that maybe ammunition will be delivered within days or weeks, and some light tanks probably within weeks or months. And when we are speaking about the German Patriot air defense system, this will also probably take months because it's a complicated military equipment, and Ukrainians need to be trained on that. Anyway, they will make a difference because the Ukrainians need them very urgently. There are reports that by Ukrainian government officials that Russia is preparing new assaults on Ukrainian territory, is summing up forces, demobilized, again getting trained. So the West is trying to support Ukraine before that happens. And on the front line, the situation is very, very volatile.
We heard President Zelensky say that there's no rational reason why these tanks haven't been supplied before. What reason have allies given?
Well, we heard some reasons before. For example, Germany said that it doesn't want to be the first, or it doesn't want to be alone to deliver modern Western tanks to Ukraine. Now we know that France did it, and then Germany and the United States just followed. I think it was agreed between all NATO countries that they would do it, and as for the United States, I think it was definitely discussed during President Zelensky's visit to Washington in late December. Of course, we heard in the months before fears in Berlin and other capitals in Europe that Russia might escalate, that Russia warned against deliveries of weapons in general, and especially heavy weapons to Ukraine, threatening with nuclear arms, nuclear weapons. But as we see, Western countries decided not to deliver the main battle tanks, for example, but decided to send light armored vehicles, infantry vehicles to Ukraine, which will help Ukraine to stabilize the front line and to go forward. And maybe, for example, French light tanks are said to be good during the urban fightings, and this is something which is happening now in eastern Ukraine.
Thanks for that, Roman. Roman Goncharenko in Kyiv. So let's get more on these announcements from Germany, the US and France. From Thomas Wiegold. Thomas is a journalist who specialises in military and international defence policy. Welcome back to DW. How do you see these German Marder fighting vehicles changing the situation on the Ukrainian front line?
Well, when we look at the numbers, US is providing about 50 Bradley infantry fighting vehicles, Germany about 40 Marder fighting vehicles. This is not the number the Ukraine needs, so the number won't make a change, but it's the first armored combat vehicles coming from the West, and I think that's a difference in itself. Now it will depend where Ukraine is going to deploy these vehicles, most probably in certain parts on the front line, which are heavily contested, and there they might make a difference.
Right. So we have armoured vehicles, which is what we're talking about now. So those and light tanks, they're one thing, but Berlin, like other Western allies, is still under pressure to send heavy, more modern battle tanks. Do you think this shift is likely to continue and make Berlin more likely to go in that direction?
It's a bit early to tell, but we've seen in recent months how Germany, but other countries as well, have changed their stand. They refused to send any heavy weapons in the early stages of the war. Then there were cannons, artillery. It has gradually changed. Now it's, for the first time, combat vehicles, and most probably, or I would see a change in coming months for main battle tanks as well.
And now the German army has struggled with hardware problems. Last month, all of its high-tech Puma tanks broke down during an exercise, and that's just one example. Would Germany be in a position to give Kyiv all the military support it needs for these vehicles?
Well, when it comes to the Marder, this is, you might even say, an outdated vehicle. It's pretty old, just like the Bradley in the US. It's from the 1980s. And most of the support will come from industry, which has old vehicles refurbished, which has all the spare parts, which has the possibility to keep those engines running and the whole thing running. When it comes to Germany, well, Germany has to be careful not to hand over too much equipment it will still need itself. And one example for this is the Patriot battery, which has been announced yesterday as well. Germany is to deliver a Patriot air defense battery. However, the German Air Force is down to 12 batteries. So even one battery given to Ukraine is a heavy blow for the German Air Force.
Thank you so much for that. That's very clear. A journalist, Thomas Wiegold.
You're welcome.
Next, we'll go to Berlin, where our political correspondent Hans Brandt can talk us through the German decision regarding those tanks. Welcome back, Hans. So why has Germany refused to send these armoured vehicles before, and why have they changed their minds now?
It's been a long history about these armoured vehicles. In fact, they were offered by German armaments industry right at the beginning of the war, because they basically are in storage and were meant to have been destroyed because they're no longer needed by the German army. But there was political resistance, especially from the Social Democrats of Chancellor Olaf Scholz, who have been reticent about arming Ukraine or getting involved in the Ukrainian battle too deeply because of concerns that Germany would be seen as an aggressor in this situation, and Germany has historical concerns about fighting against Russian troops dating from the Second World War. What's changed now is the general situation on the battlefield and the development of discussions within NATO. The German government has always said it would only supply such weapons if other NATO countries do that as well, together with other NATO countries. That's what's happening now. France and the United States are also supplying similar weapons. And then there is a very simple logistical reason for supplying these weapons. Until now, one has supplied Soviet-era armored vehicles to Ukraine from East Germany, for instance, and from NATO allies from the east of Europe. And the ammunition for these vehicles is now running out because nobody in the West is manufacturing Soviet-era ammunition. So in order to be able to supply ammunition, they need new weapons.
Right. And I'd like your thoughts on a recent poll that's been conducted here in Germany, Hans. On the question of military support for Ukraine, only 25% of those polled expressed the need to send more weapons to Ukraine. Two-thirds saying that German weapons deliveries to Ukraine were adequate or had gone too far. So, Hans Brandt, does this sound like people are getting tired of this war?
No, I think that's a misinterpretation of the figures. I think one should turn that around and say that only a third of people polled are against further weapons deliveries, and two-thirds are either satisfied or asking for more weapons. And you can see that in another aspect of this poll, which is conducted every month. This question has been asked over the month, and in the trend, you can see that the number of people that support weapons deliveries is increasing, and the number of people that support that are against weapons deliveries is decreasing. At the same time, Germans are saying that the situation in Ukraine is what concerns them most, even ahead of things such as inflation and energy prices. And they are saying that they expect the war not to end this year. So the support for the government and weapons deliveries is strong.
Thanks for that, Hans. Hans Brandt in Berlin.
And for more on these announcements, we can speak to military expert Dr. Vita Feistinger. Welcome to DW. Can I ask you, how do you see these German Marder fighting vehicles actually changing the situation on the Ukrainian front line?
I would say in general, yes, but not immediately, because it takes time to bring the weapon system into the country, to train the soldiers and so on and so forth. So the key point for me is that there is a general decision to deliver tank vehicles to Ukraine, and that is a new point, I would say.
OK, now, armoured vehicles and light tanks are one thing, but Berlin, like other Western allies, is still under pressure to send heavy, more modern battle tanks. Do you think that Berlin is likely to shift further in this direction?
I would not exclude it, but I do not see an indicator at the moment, because Germany is not the only country that is very reluctant in this point sending heavy main battle tanks. So I would say it is a challenging time for the Ukraine to get all the different types of a tank family, as the military calls it, because you need not only a single element. A main battle tank is not everything, and an armored personnel carrier also. You have to see, you have armored vehicles for the mobility on the ground. You need protected artillery, also armored. And so we are talking about the family, and it is the challenge for the Ukrainian side to get all the elements. What we hear now is that main battle tanks are still restricted, but the armored personnel carriers are on the way. So the big question will be where to get the main battle tanks.
OK, and does Ukraine need these heavy battle tanks to be able to win this war?
Of course. You cannot move forward. You cannot have high mobility. You cannot have the whole firepower without having main battle tanks, especially when you go into offensive operations. For the defensive matter, I would say it could be manageable. But if you think in offensives to reconquer territory in Ukraine, you need main battle tanks.
Dr. Vita Feistinger.
That is why Ukraine is asking for.
Please go ahead.
That is why Ukraine is asking for about 300 main battle tanks.
All right. Dr. Vita Feistinger, thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome.